welcome back to the channel. In today's video, MtoA 521 episode 2, I will be continuing on the previous episode where I will be adding more detail and adding a glass shader to this currently nice looking gemstone. So on the left you can see where we left off in episode 1. We created some nice bump structure which starts strong at the bottom and fades off towards the top. We added some ZBrush breakup to get some more details on the edges. And in this episode we will be focusing on getting a close looking glass shader similar to the one at the bottom here, something like that, or some misty ones. So that's something for us to decide, but I will just show you all the possibilities which we can do and try to achieve. Before we get going, I just want to introduce a few promotional things for my channels. So to start off, you can follow me or follow the tutorials using the source files from each episode by joining this Patreon tier source files, and you get instant access to all the previous tutorials, which are more than 20, and you can follow along on each one of those. And for upcoming tutorials, I will always keep them updated, so we are always in the loop. And then obviously I am on Instagram, where you can see my updates, my personal stuff, some rendering, so something to enjoy as well. And I have the light shader download page where you can get instant access to our tutorial, where you can get access to the toolbox of light shaders for DCC plugins. So you would get a menu bar at the top here with several tools. It's developed for Katana, Nuke, and Maya. And then I have my first app in the iOS App Store, where you have access to, or you can get measured values for metals, and you can recreate them in your DCC package, or you can actually visualize them in your current environment using ARKit, which is an augmented reality feature for iOS devices. And you can place different geometries, assign those shaders or metals, and see how they would look in real life. So that's all for the promotional things. So let's jump right into creating this nice looking gemstone. Alright, so we started off, I just hit play right here and I do isolate selected so you can see what we did here. Created a bump, added some occlusion using the bump which plugs into a normal map, and then we used the world position pass and clamped it with a height value to control the bump height. So all that is creating the details around the edges and the stronger bump at the bottom and the slowly fade off towards the top. So this is where we're currently at, and all the rest is a very simple Lambert shader and nothing going on. As you can see, we have no roughness maps and we don't have any transmission, and we will be working with these two things right now. So we don't need any diffuse for now, unless you want to create some dirt or something like that on top, but currently we don't want to do that. So what is important is how the shader works is this: the IOR and the roughness directly control the transmission as well, and transmission in this case is a refraction. So IOR is kind of the amount of reflection per angle. So if it's front facing, you should get less reflections or more reflections based on the value you enter here. So, and you have some presets. If you click, you've got cornea, which is the eye, and then you have simple glass, you've got eyes, which should be very similar, and then you get diamond. And I think we should work with a diamond because it's very shiny, and you can see already what happens if I change my IOR to that. You can see that the render gets a lot brighter just because it's so much more shiny. It's more like a metal, almost a diamond. But the surface is super clean. It most of the time has not any dirt or roughness to it. So the roughness should go very low, so you get a very shiny surface. So a value of 0 will get very detailed and very crisp reflections. And in my honest opinion, I think this is always too clean and nothing is that super clean. So I tend to add some just a slight breakup to everything. Maybe this is too much, maybe 0.15 or something. Just that it's not super clean, but this is preference again, and you can see you get these very clean things, glints and everywhere. So for now, let's just keep this to 0 so it's very clean, and I explain you why I do that. And the next thing is to create something refractive or glass-like, ice-like. You would just enable transmission to 1, and you can already see what's happening here. We get a pretty clean surface right there. And you can see it's very broken up, and the problem is because of the bump map. And refractions are very sensitive to bump values. So we would definitely need to work on that. And you can see we currently have a dark shadow, which means the shape is still opaque. So we need to change that to be non-opaque. So we get transparent shadows, which increases render times but gives us more accurate reflections. And okay, so if I save this now and I just disable the bump, we should actually see something interesting already. So this is now without any bump, just the shader itself, and you can see what that is looking like. And it looks like a nice faceted diamond or crystal actually. So I think we need to reduce the bump amount. But before we do so, I just want to explain the roughness, how the specular roughness affects the transmission. So whenever I increase the roughness in the spec, you see that the refraction also gets affected, and it gets very diffuse pretty quickly. And there is, like, if you don't want to have this behavior, which is physical though, but sometimes you want to have more artistic or like something to get rid of noises or whatever, there is a workaround, and I like to use that a lot for glass. So my trick is to actually disable the roughness completely and also disable the specularity of that layer completely. So we only have the IOR, which controls the transmission, and we want to keep that on 2.42. And then the workaround is to use a code instead. So if I would enable the code layer with the same IOR of 2.4 whatever preset, 2.42, we kind of get the same thing, but now the benefit of this, which is breaking physicality, but I can actually control the roughness independently from the transmission roughness, which is helpful. And in my case, I like that a lot. So that's something to consider, definitely. So roughness, so now I can have a higher roughness to 5 or something, and this will be more apparent if I plug in the bump map again. But currently this is working pretty good, I think. So let's just, the first thing which I haven't tried yet is to actually subdivide it some more. Oh, we actually don't need it because it's the high res. So this is what we get, right? So let's bring back the bump map and just reconnect this guy to the normal camera. And you can see now it's really crazy. And now we can use the multiplier. Currently we multiply by -1. What we can do, we can just multiply by -0.2, which should actually reduce the bump effect. So if I multiply by 0, it should be off, which it is. So multiply by -0 to 5 maybe, we get a really subtle effect. Should be almost off at the top. We see something still going on here. Let's just copy this value to all the other channels as well. And I think this is kind of what we were going for. So if I render the whole thing, we can see that there's some interesting definition on the surface. It's not super clean. This might still be a bit too rough, but then again, this would be preference, I guess. So, okay, let's just see what value. This should be still negative, so the height should be very small now. Okay, so we can work with that for now, and I think the next step should be to work with the roughness in general. But let's just test one more thing. If I connect the same bump to the code normal, what do we get then? And remove this guy. So now we are just bump mapping the coding. which is interesting as well. So let's just do -1. So I'm just trying something out here quickly. I think this is actually what I wanted to do. So because we don't have any specular base, this is not affecting the roughness at all. The transmission roughness. So by using that, we just kind of do a coated bump, which might look weird, but it's actually very interesting because we can again control it independently from the transmission. Obviously this might be too much. We can introduce some more roughness to this whole thing. Something like that, which kind of looks like ice now. And then we can have a separate bump map which just breaks up the transmission a bit. Because currently this would more look like some plastic thingy. But let's just go now into the glass shader itself. And for now, just reduce it a bit because it's a bit strong, I think. So let's just go maybe 0.25 in here. Okay, so now the overall bump is reduced, so we should not have the strong edges everywhere. Okay, so the next step would be to play around with some coloring of the gemstone. And to do that, we head over to the transmission tab and we will play around with color depth and maybe some scatter and dispersion Abbey. Alright, so we want to have like a teal, cyan, diamond, or gemstone. I keep saying diamond, but it should be just a gemstone. It's mostly a quartz or something like that. So in the transmission, let's head over to color and just pick kind of like a light blue, something like that for the color. And this is what we get out of the box. It's very saturated and blue. And yeah, so currently let's just desaturate it a bit. Yeah, something like that. Maybe just rotate the blue a bit so it's not as cyan, more kind of like that color. That's pretty neat. So now we come to the depth part, and the depth is kind of a way of saying how deep is the surface, how much color will it need, and the smaller this value, the richer the color. So when it's 0, it's actually off, but if you have a value of maybe something 0.01, you get a very rich and deep color. And just by increasing this value, you reduce the depth of the crystal, kind of, or the depth of the shader, and you get just a color where you have thick surfaces. And you can see it in the example. In this example where you have thicker objects, you get a darker color, and this is kind of what we get on the left now. And you can play around just by gradually dragging this value. You can see I'm slowly introducing more saturation to the gemstone until you get the desired effect, I guess. So again, now because we played around with the depth, I still want to just have a more bluish color. So to get more to the blue, let's just go to the color wheel again and just offset it a bit more. So this is, yeah, I like that bluish thing. So let's go with that color. Yeah, I like that a lot. And then we can go to the scatter, and what scatter does, it's kind of creating particles within the shader. And let's just do save. So if you want to add some mist, or you can use it for muddy water or something like that. Different applications. Why can't I move it anymore? Like something like this, right? You can see if I introduce some scatter, how misty it gets, and you can also play around with the value. And if I have a higher value, maybe of 10, it almost gets like a solid object. And we can use this to create some particles within this thing. So that will be currently, this would be what we will do next. So if I bring in some saturation, or even if we just want to have a white color for that, we can do that as well. So obviously you see where I'm going with this. I need to map it to a value, right, to get something interesting. Otherwise, there will be nothing. So we want to have it misty somewhere, and then we kind of use the world position pass for this. And we can quickly test it if I would just connect the, let's see if we can do this. If we just connect the previous one, this guy, to that. Let's see what value we get here. So this is a value of 1, factor 3. I'm not sure if this will work. So let's just try something else. I just use a range for now. AI range, and this will control the transmission scatter. So let's just connect this color to my range, and this will connect to the scatter transmission. I don't have it exposed, I guess. I'll just drop it there. Okay, and you can see something is happening at the bottom and at the top. So if I hit save and I just adjust the RAM to be more stronger at the bottom, currently this is going from 1 to 15, and we just want to invert this so it's really dense at the bottom. So I think if we just do that, what do we get then? Negative values. So no invert just yet. It's something we need to play around with now. So let's see if I do this 15, we should get the fall off. So this is now, I think this is interesting. We need to do the negative thing as well to invert it. Can try this. Yeah, that's interesting. So we have a top value. So now we just need to get some more detail, or more, not detail, but we need to get a higher value in here. Let's see if we can get this going. This is now a trial and error thing where we need to play around with the values. Okay, so 7 and 2. So we can just do this. This should be on 0, I think. So a value of 0 at the top, so no scatter, and then it goes and increases in scatter up to a value of 7. So let's see what we get. So this already looks something more interesting, right? And now we would just need to really crank up some noise values to get something really interesting going on. And this is something I'll be doing right now. So the range is controlled. So now we just need to see which value in the RAM we need to play around with to get, I think this one is the main guy. So input max is the one to play with. So let's just connect the noise again. It's always noises. The world is full of noises. So what did I say? Input max, right? So input max connects to this guy. And then we have values ranging from, what did I do? I think 4 and 3 maybe. 4 and 3. Alrighty. Let's see what we get in here. Interesting. Let's just lock it to this range node and just play around with these values. So we need to go maybe up till 8, up till 10. See the whole thing. Let's just do, again, this is just for you to try out stuff. A value of 5 up there, 5 octaves, nice break up there, some distortion maybe. Let's see what we're doing here. This is interesting, so let's see the result of that. And now you can see what's going on here. You get these nice swirls, and now it's just time to play around to get the desired look you wanna have, right? So this is maybe a bit too spotty, so as I said, it's playing around with values, making sure you get something you want to see. And for me, it's always easier to actually work in this mode. Just it's easier to visualize for me. Okay, I like that. And now we can go back to the range. We can play around with these guys. This is just the overall strength of it now, and let's see what we can do here. Just add more contrast to the whole thing. And this is very interesting. And obviously now you can go back to transmission and play around with the color, right? So currently it's pretty grayed out. So what we can do now is we can just multiply this number with a color to get something even more interesting. So currently it's a black and white color driven by the noise. So you can just plug in a color here. Hopefully this should work if we just do some saturation. No, that doesn't really work, interestingly. So let's just see if we... Let's just disconnect it quickly and see how it would work. Okay, so just quickly disconnect the range and see if I do some scatter color instead, what we get. So this does work for sure, but I think if I go a value higher than 1, no, it still does work. Okay, so there's something we need to play here. So if I do a really dark blue, this does work, and this is what I want to get. So using the range, we can try something with a AI composite and just use this to there, and then out color goes to transmission scatter. And now, what did we do now? Why doesn't this work as I thought it would? Interesting. So this should actually, oh, this needs to be on multiply. There we go. Multiply was the key, because I'm multiplying the red color with the range value, so to get a saturated color. So I think this should do it actually. If I play around with the value, we should be able to decrease the saturation of it. And obviously we can change it to be a more cyan color or more blue. Come on. I think this looks actually very nice. And now we can again just play around with the range, move it up or down. We should be very flexible in what we need to create. You can see now if I increase the output, we get a really solid color at the bottom, which honestly looks very interesting, and I think we should keep it. And we can just play with this guy to move it up a bit, increase the contrast of the map, some smoky elements which are very cool. And now what you can do, you can actually do the same thing for the top, like invert the Y ramp and do something in the top, or maybe something more whitish or something like that. And this kind of was all I wanted to show for the second episode. And in episode 3, which will be coming up next week, I will be presenting you a very interesting approach using volume shading to get even more structure within the diamond or within the gemstone. And for the next one, we will be working with the dispersion Abbey as well. So we will be playing around with this value a bit, adding some noise to this. So the default is, I think, 62. Oh, it's 55 for the diamond. And what it's doing, it's creating like a breakup in the wavelengths just to get more variation in it, which is a physical phenomenon which happens in diamonds and really hard objects which break up the wavelengths. And so we will enable that as well. And so for the next, we will be working on the roughness, on the overall roughness of the object, and we will be creating these volume shaders. So thanks for tuning in, and I will check you out in the next episode.